All right, I'm just going to show you a short video now, or in a second. It's by an organisation called Childlike Media, and they've done a series of, I think they've used AI, well, obviously, because they don't have video footage of Jonah and the whale, but they've put through like a little snapshot, and this video is called The Bible in 90 Seconds, and I just thought it was really clever, and they've put together through some other ones as well, so let's just have a quick look at that.
We're currently showing copyrighted material. Please check the episode description box for a link to the video so you don't miss out. Then come back here to rejoin.
How cool is that? Very cool. All right, so we're going to head into an overview, pretty much what we just saw. A lot of this stuff you'll already know, but again, it's that whole thing of not being so familiar with the Bible that we forget to become intimate with the Lord as we're going through things. So we know that the Bible is a collection of 66 books, and it's split into two parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament starts with creation, and it tells us the story of the Jewish people right up until the time of Christ. It's made up of 39 individual books, and it's written by 28 different authors. And it covers a time period of about 2,000 years. The New Testament is the record of the birth of Jesus, his life and his ministry, and the ministry of his disciples, which was carried on after he was crucified. It is a collection of 27 books, and it was written by 9 different authors. It's really covering the time of period of less than 100 years. So it's quite different in what it covers. Of the Old Testament, there are the 39 books. There are 3 different kinds of books. Before David puts that up, don't put it up. Can you tell me what they are? Anybody? 3 major kinds of collections of books in the Old Testament. Prophets, history, and poetry. Well done, guys. So the first 17 books are history books, and these are general. The next 5 are poetry, and then the following 17 are prophetic. And it's important for us to know when we're reading a book what it is, because then we know what kind of information to expect. So when I'm reading a poetry book, I'm not necessarily looking at a record of history. So we want to know what we're reading so we know what information we're looking for. There's a table there that I can give you a copy of if you're interested later, of the list of all the different books there. Obviously there's some overlap. Some of the poetry books carry a little bit of history in them. A lot of the history books have a bit of poetry in them as well, but these are just generalizations. The poetic and prophetic books were written during time periods that were covered in the first 17 historic books. So I have a timeline to put up there. It's very small. I've got copies on this table of the timeline if you want it. But it's showing in the top row, it's got all the history books, which are green. And then it's got the poetic books are in blue. And then the prophetic books are in orange. So you can see, for example, when 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles, when all those events happened, that was really when the majority of the Psalms were written. So it's a really good way, because sometimes you read the Psalms and you're like, I know David wrote these, but when you do the Bible recap, the Psalms are actually dotted in during David's life. So it shows you when he was hiding in this cave, he wrote this Psalm, and all of a sudden you're like, these make a lot more sense now, and I know why they're so desperate a lot of the time. So that's available if anyone wants a copy of that as well. And then in the New Testament, of the 27 books in the New Testament, there are 3 different kinds again. Does anyone know what they are? It's pretty similar. Mikey? The Gospels, yep, or historic. Church epistles, yes, and general epistles. So we've got letters from Paul. Epistles are letters. So the way I've broken it down is history, the Pauline epistles, and general epistles. So the first 5 books, which are the Gospels, are history. The next 13 books are letters written by Paul. Some were to churches and some were to individuals. And then we've got our general letters as well. And once again, the majority of the letters were written during the book of Acts. And again, in the Bible recap, you'll read a couple of chapters of Acts and then you jump over to one of the letters that was written during that time. And we've got a timeline of that as well. So you can see that there's a lot of letters that were written during Acts, but a lot of letters were written after the book of Acts finished as well. All right, so we're going to break our overview of the Bible down into 12 different eras. And I first came across these eras in this book, which is called 30 Days to Understanding the Bible. And it's an overview, but you'll find these eras everywhere. It's not uncommon for scholars to put it together as 12 eras of the Bible. So this week we're just looking at the first 5. And I'm going to give you, actually, Lisa, would you mind helping me? I'm going to make you do a little activity. Make you, that sounds nice. I'm going to ask you to do a little activity. So we're going to give you the first 5 eras of the Bible for your table, and I'd like you to put them in chronological order, please, that you think it happened in. So you're allowed to talk to each other and help each other. I'm sure you'll find it pretty easy. All right, let's leave it there. Just want you to call out what was the first era. Oh, that's the easy one. Creation. Well done. What was the next era? Patriarchs. My husband got it wrong. There it goes, creation, and then the patriarchs. So move yours into the right order if it's wrong, Derek. And what was the third one? Exodus. So we've got creation, patriarch, Exodus. What was the fourth one? No one's as confident as they were when they yelled out the first one. Conquest is the next one. So you can put that into that order. And then obviously the final one is Judges. Who got all 5 right on their table? Yeah, I knew Betty's table would get it. Well done. All right, so now Lisa's going to give you, keep that in that order. We're going to give you the 5 major figures that go along with each of those eras. So each era has got a prominent figure or person. So I'd like you to see if you can match those ones up. Okay, time is up. So do you want to call out for me who was the main figure for creation? Adam. What about for the patriarchs? Abraham. Exodus? Moses. Conquest. Joshua, and Judges was Samson. Well done. That was a bit easier, wasn't it? Now's the easiest one. We're going to do a major location for each era. I'm saying it's the easiest because 3 of them are the same. So if you can work out the other 2, then you'll be right. Alrighty, let's see how we went with that one. So we've got creation with Adam in Eden. We've got the patriarchs with Abraham in Canaan. Exodus with Moses in Egypt. Well done. Conquest, these ones are going to be easy, with Joshua in Canaan. And Judges with Samson in Canaan. Well done. Top of the class, most of you. All right, I'm going to just hand you out just a table which is just going to show that, plus a little bit more information that you can fill in, write notes on if you want to, or not if you don't want to. It's got the symbol, the era, the figure, the location, a little bit of a brief summary of that era or a storyline, the date when it was written, and also the books in the Bible that it covers. So like I said, there's 12 different eras. There are 9 major eras in the Old Testament and 3 in the New Testament. And we're just looking at creation, patriarch, Exodus, conquest, and Judges today. So with the creation era, it's covered in Genesis chapter 1 to 11. It was written about 4,000 years before Christ was born. And it covers about 2,000 years in total. So it is the beginning of the world. The beginning of mankind, Adam and Eve, the fall into sin, Noah and the flood, the dispersion of nations with the Tower of Babel, and it covers some other early events as well. So there are 4 major events that we think of when we think of creation. They are creation, the fall, the flood, and the Tower of Babel. Are all the Bible Sunday school stories coming back? So creation's covered in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. The heavens and the earth and everything in them are created. Adam and Eve are created. Mankind is created in the image of God. They are in perfect fellowship and perfect harmony with Him. They live in the Garden of Eden. The image of God that created in is a spiritual and a personal likeness. Man has a spirit and they will live forever. Man has intellect, emotion, and will. They have an understanding of a divine being of who God is. And man is born or created with a moral sense of right and wrong. Also, man was created to be creative. And then we get to the fall in Genesis chapter 3, where sin entered the world. So Satan appeared in the form of a serpent. He lured Adam and Eve into rebelling against God. David, could I have the next slide, please? And violating the one restriction that God gave them, which was do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But they did, as we know. So as a consequence, they're driven out of the Garden of Eden, and a curse falls on all of creation. Sin has entered the world, and it's called the fall of man. Then we come to the flood, Genesis chapter 6 through to chapter 10. This is judgment for sin. So over the next several hundred years, man grows greatly in number, but also sin grows as well. A time comes when God can only find 8 people on earth who are willing to live in a righteous relationship with Him. Only 8 people. These are Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their 3 wives. So in judgment for sin, God sends a worldwide flood which destroys mankind except for Noah and his family who are saved in an ark. And then following on from that, we have in Genesis chapter 11, the Tower of Babel. This was the beginning of nations. So right at the start, God commanded man to spread out, to populate, and to subdue the earth. In direct disobedience, man did the opposite. They said, let's stay in one place. Let's build a tower to ourselves, basically, the Tower of Babel. So God sees this and He causes the large group of people to begin speaking in a different language. Because they can't communicate with each other, they can't continue progress on that tower. And the people of each tongue disperse, and this forms the beginning of the nations of the world. And as we've seen, we've got Adam as our central figure, and we've got a map on the slides there of the Garden of Eden. Now, the Garden of Eden is impossible to know exactly where it was, but the Bible tells us it was near the convergence of 4 rivers, and we know where 2 of them are, which is the Euphrates River and the Tigris River. So this is roughly where it may have been. I've got copies of those maps up the front if anybody wants a copy as well. I just want you to have a discussion just for 1 minute on your table, thinking about creation, the fall, the flood, and the Tower of Babel. As we mentioned with the Bible recap, we're looking for a God shot. We're looking about something to do with God's character or who He's revealing Himself to be. So I'd like you just to have a quick little discussion on your table about what God shot you can see when you look at the creation era. Don't all talk at once. But you might have to talk to me in the next one. I know everyone's name here, so I can call on you if I need to. All right, next one's the patriarch era. So the word patriarch is a strange word, but it just means a biblical figure that was classed as one of the fathers of the human race. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. So the patriarch era covers Genesis chapter 12 right through to chapter 50. So in the patriarch era, God establishes His covenant with the ancestors of the Hebrew people, specifically with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, who becomes Israel, and Joseph. This leads to the formation of the 12 tribes, and this includes when they migrated to Egypt. So there are 4 major figures in the patriarch era: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Abraham is in Genesis 12 to 23, and he's seen as the father of the Hebrew people. Because of Adam's sin, because of the fall of man, God's attention is now focused on a plan of redemption for mankind. He wants a people that He can work through. He wants people that will reflect himself and through whom he can spread the message of redemption to the whole world. So he chooses Abraham. Abraham becomes the father of the Hebrew people. God promises him a land, countless descendants, and blessing. Abraham's living in Ur at the time, which is near, again, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers meet. But God leads him to the land of Canaan. In Canaan, Abraham settles there and he has 2 sons, Ishmael and Isaac. So then we have Isaac, the second father of promise. And I think it's worth noting he was the second son. This is covered in Genesis 24 to 26. The fulfillment of Abraham's promise is passed down to his son, Isaac. He sees several major miracles during his life. He lives in the same land as Abraham, and he becomes quite prosperous, and he fathers 2 sons as well, Esau and Jacob. Then we look at Jacob, who's known as the father of the nation of Israel, covered in Genesis 27 to 35. So the promises given to Abraham are passed through to Isaac and then passed through to Jacob, who again is the second son. Jacob starts out, or the meaning of his name is deceiver. It's a nice thing to call your son. But through a series of miracles and encounters with God, he has a change of heart. Jacob has 12 sons, and the promises of Abraham are passed down to all of them as a family. While Abraham's the father of the Hebrew people, Jacob is the father of the nation of Israel. So from his 12 sons, we get the 12 tribes of Israel. And then we have Joseph, who was a leader in Egypt, and he's covered in Genesis 37 to 50. So Jacob's sons sell him as a slave, and he's taken to Egypt. Because of his righteousness and because of God's faithfulness, Joseph becomes a great leader while he's in Egypt. And then during a severe famine, his family comes to Egypt for food. They're reunited with him, and as a result, they enjoy peace and comfort. But after Joseph dies, his people are enslaved for the next 400 years. This time of trial sharpens their spiritual hunger, and they cry out to God for deliverance. So where the location on the map there is Canaan for this era, and the major figure are those 4 that we had a look at. Have a little chat now about where you could see the character of God, or what your God shot would be, looking at what happens in that patriarch era. Let's move on to the Exodus era. So this is covered in the books Exodus right through to Deuteronomy. The Israelites during this time endured 400 years of slavery in Egypt before God uses Moses to deliver them. There's a journey that involves 10 plagues, the crossing of the Red Sea, and the receiving of the law at Mount Sinai. So the 4 major events in the Exodus era are deliverance, the law, rebellion, and 40 years of wandering. So deliverance is in Exodus 1 to 8. There was freedom from slavery in Egypt. God answered their cry for deliverance. He raised up Moses as his spokesperson to Pharaoh, and he asked for freedom for the Hebrew people. Pharaoh refused, and a series of 10 plagues is sent upon Egypt to prompt Pharaoh, I like that, to let the people go. The plagues start out bad and then they get worse. There's frogs, gnats, water turned into blood, and finally the death of the firstborn of every household in Egypt. And this is the institution of the Passover. So finally Pharaoh lets the people go. After they leave, he changes his mind and he tries to capture them again. God parts the Red Sea and the Hebrew people cross over safely to the other side. The waters come together again and they destroy the Egyptian army. The Hebrew people are freed from slavery and they head for God's chosen destination for them, which was the promised land of Canaan. This is the land that we've just seen God had promised Abraham, and they finally get to settle back in there as their home. Then we come to the law, which is Exodus 19 right through to chapter 40. This is God's commandments given at Mount Sinai. So the Hebrew people now begin to take on a national identity as Israel. From the Red Sea, they travel south to the bottom of the Sinai Peninsula and they camp at Mount Sinai. They receive God's commandments here. Moses meets with God alone at the top of Mount Sinai, and he receives the 10 Commandments written on tablets of stone by the finger of God. He receives a full revelation of the law, which is to govern Israel's national life, as well as their relationship with God. He promises to bless them abundantly for obedience and to curse for disobedience. And then we come to the rebellion. This is covered in Numbers 10 to Numbers 14. So Israel leaves Mount Sinai. They migrate north to a place called Kadesh Barnea. This is the southern gateway into the Promised Land. 12 spies are sent into that Promised Land, and when they return, they've got some good news and they've got some bad news. The good news is that the land is beautiful. The land is bountiful. They say it's flowing with milk and honey. But the bad news is there's giants in there and there's hostile armies. So 10 spies give a negative report in spite of God already saying, I will deal with those opposing forces. They still give a negative report. But two spies, Joshua and Caleb, give a positive report. And they encourage the people, let's believe God. Let's go and take the land. But the people believe the majority, and they refuse to go into the land. And this is known, or becomes known, as a place of rebellion against God. And then we have 40 years of wandering, which is covered in Numbers 20 to 36, the consequence of them rebelling against God. The Exodus generation must wander in the wilderness until everyone 20 years old or older at the time has died. And over the next 40 years, a new generation of leadership rises, and the people are now willing to follow the leaders into the land. I think 40 years of wandering will do that to you, won't it? So Moses leads them to the north of the Dead Sea, right near Jericho, which is on the east of the Promised Land. And Moses, getting near to the end of his life, encourages his people, and he gives them additional instruction, and all those instructions are in the book of Deuteronomy. So we've used Egypt as the beginning location of this era. Let's have a little chat about what you would see of God's character when we're looking at these stories in the Exodus era. They're amazing stories, aren't they, for us to reflect on. Moving on to the conquest era. It's probably one of my favourites, I think. This is covered in the book of Joshua. So, led by Joshua, the Israelites conquer and settle the promised land of Canaan. There are 4 major events during this era: the Jordan, Jericho, conquest, and dominion. The Jordan's covered in Joshua chapter 1 verse 5, and again it's another miraculous parting of water. So God handpicks Joshua to succeed Moses. His first challenge is to cross the Jordan River. God tells him to prepare the nation for a ceremonial procession and to begin walking, the priests going first toward the Jordan River. As soon as the priests touch the water, God parts the water for them. The people respond and God parts the entire river and they cross over without incident, and then the river begins flowing again. Then we come to Jericho, Joshua chapter 6. This is a miraculous conquest of a city. The city of Jericho is over on the side of the Jordan River near the Dead Sea. It is an eastern entry into the Promised Land. It's the way to get into Canaan. It's a fortified city and it poses a threat to them. So Joshua stands looking across the city and he's just thinking, how are we going to do this? How are we going to conquer Jericho? And an angel of the Lord appears to him and says, march around the city once a day for 7 days. On the 7th day, march around it 7 times and get everyone to shout, and the city wall will fall down. How far-fetched does that sound, if we're being honest? But that is exactly what happens. And then we move into the conquest, which is Joshua chapter 7 to chapter 12. This is the defeat of Canaan. So the Canaanites are united in their fear and their hatred of the Israelites, but they're not really united together. So there's lots of different kings over different areas, over different cities and different parts of that country. So Joshua cuts right through the middle part. He's heading towards the Mediterranean Sea. He divides the land and then he begins to conquer it from south to north, working his way up. Takes about 7 years, and then the initial defeat of Canaan is complete. Interesting, it takes 7 years, isn't it? And then we get to dominion, which is Joshua chapter 13 through to chapter 20, and this is the finalising of the dominion of Canaan. So each of the 12 tribes of Israel are given a land area, and they're responsible for finalising dominion over that area. All 12 tribes inhabit their areas, and they form like a loose federation with the other tribes. So the main area on our map is Canaan for this one. And moving on to our final era, it is the Judges era, and that's covered in the book of Judges, and we're also including the book of Ruth in this one. It is a 400-year period after the conquest, and Israel is governed by a series of military and spiritual leaders who are called judges, and they experience a cycle. They seem to experience this same cycle all the way through the Old Testament of sin, oppression, repentance, and deliverance. There are 4 major subjects in the Judges era, and that is Judges, rebellion, cycles, and like I said, the book of Ruth. So the leaders of Israel were known as judges. They are political and military leaders of Israel. There are 4 probably main judges, or ones that we'll know in this era. That is Deborah, a female judge, woohoo, early in the Judges era. And then there's Gideon, who defeats an army of thousands with only 300 men. We've got Samson. He's probably the most famous one, who had incredible strength when he had long hair. And then we've got Samuel. Samuel was the last judge, and he was the first prophet. And then we have rebellion, the breaking of God's law. So just before Moses dies, in Deuteronomy chapter 7, he gives Israel 3 instructions in order to keep their nation from becoming corrupted by the Canaanites. So they're like, we've taken over Canaan, but there's still Canaanites living here, and here are 3 things that you need to do. They need to destroy all the inhabitants of Canaan. They are not allowed to marry the Canaanites, and they are not to worship the Canaanite gods. In true Israel form, they fail on all 3 accounts. They break God's law, and I'm making jokes about that, but we all know we would have done the same, don't we? They break God's law, and then their moral degradation is recorded of what happened to them and how they slid back. But there's a series of cycles when we come to the book of Judges, and it's the repetition of really their misfortunes. So there's 7 cycles recorded in the book of Judges, and each cycle has 5 parts. Number 1, Israel sins. Number 2, God disciplines them through military conquest by a neighbouring country. Number 3, Israel repents and cries out to God for deliverance. Number 4, God raises up a judge who delivers them from bondage. And number 5, God frees the land from oppression for the remainder of that judge's life. And then that cycle begins again. And then we come to the book of Ruth. So Ruth's a real example of moral and spiritual strength. There's only 4 chapters in the book of Ruth, but it's a powerful story. Her story is one of love, it's one of purity and commitment. She's a living illustration of the blessing that God showers on those who live in faithful obedience to him. And she's actually listed in the lineage from Abraham to Jesus, which is pretty special. So I guess the main figure we think of when we think of all the judges could be Samson. We all know that story. And again, the location for this era is in Canaan. So that's our first 5. Hopefully you'll be able to go home and you can recite them all to me next week now without getting any wrong, Derek. You can do a bit of extra homework, get that one right. It's a pretty powerful story, and we are seeing, even as we go through those first 5, you can just see those patterns, can't you? And you can see what God's doing. And gosh, you can see his patience. And that just shows me that he's going to be just that patient with me. So just have just a final little discussion, and you don't have to share it because no one wants to. Have a little chat just about what you can see, what stands out to you when we just look at that part of the overview. What can we see in what God was doing and showing us about himself? All right. Thank you for your cooperation. I know some of you really detest those little group discussions that I make you do, so thank you for humouring me and sitting through that. We are going to end our service there, but just before we do that, I'd really love it if at our tables we could all just spend a little bit of time in prayer, just praying for each other, praying for the church, praying for our community right at the start of this year. And then obviously there's tea and coffee. Feel free to hang around and chat with each other for as long as you like. The resources are here if you want the maps or the timelines. And we're also just going to pass around our offering buckets at the same time. But just take a few moments just to pray with and for each other, and then we can leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Drysdale Community Church Sunday Recap Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for future episode releases. Also consider liking our Facebook page to stay up to date with all that's happening within the life of our church.